The NFL regular season is coming to a close, but we still have one final week remaining to search out those edges for player props, DFS contests. And for that reason, I have continued to grind all of the utilization data. And based on trends over the last few games, there are two running backs that are in new roles. And for our first running back that we've got to discuss, we head to Pittsburgh, where the Steelers are facing off against the Ravens this weekend, hoping to get a win and a little bit of help elsewhere so that they can punch a ticket to the NFL playoffs. And one guy that they have been relying on more and more every week is Jaylen Warren. And to get a better idea of how this usage for Warren has changed, we can head over to fantasylife.com and we can click on the utilization suite of tools for completely free. I've gone to the game log view and isolated down to the last 3 games. And you'll see he has a 33% rush share, getting 10.3 carries per game. That's not really where the changes come into play. He's been close to those numbers since around week 9. But there is a change in the passing game utilization, a 74% route participation. That used to be much more in line with a split between himself and Najee Harris, but he's taken over the long down and distance work with 97% of the snaps and 98% of the 2-minute offense. Now, those things alone don't necessarily mean a lot more fantasy points, but Jaylen Warren's been a high-end target earner all year. 28% targets per route run. That ranks 3rd in the NFL out of all running backs with at least 250 routes. And that has led to 5.3 targets per game, a 22% target share over this stretch. And Warren is averaging 13.4 fantasy points per game. The really interesting thing with Warren, as I dug into the historical data over the last 12 years, there's room for upside, which doesn't seem like it would be the case when you've got another back like Najee Harris so involved. But when you look at that comp group, the average was 16.2 fantasy points per game with a running back 9 finish. And when you look at the closest comps to Jaylen Warren, you're going to see that all of these guys had backfield competition and they were able to put up these fantasy points in limited roles. The first name is Ahmad Bradshaw, a blast from the past. In 2014, he averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game. And then in 2016, we had Theo Riddick of the Lions with 16.2 fantasy points per game. And a name you guys all know, Austin Eckler in 2020, before he took over that every down role, averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game. And then finally, everyone knows DeAndre Swift. His time with the Lions never could lock down that every down role, but in 2021, he averaged 16.2 fantasy points per contest. So when you put all of these factors together for Warren, I had no choice but to upgrade him in the utilization report this week. He moves to low-end running back 2 status, but you can still get him over on DraftKings for $5,400. Now, this will be on the Saturday slate, but the nice thing about that, the Steelers will not know their fate when they play this game. They are alive for a playoff spot. They've got to win. Like I said earlier, they're going to need some more help, but they won't know any of those results heading into their game. We also have the Ravens, who have clinched the number 1 seed in the AFC already. There's not a lot left for them to play for, so we could see some of their starters rested at different points in the game, which could help the matchup for Warren. Of course, over on DraftKings, you can do more than just play DFS, and football is more fun when you are in on the action. And this weekend, we've teamed up with DraftKings to do just that. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets instantly when they place their first $5 bet. That's right, it's that simple. Just download the DraftKings app, sign up using the promo code DEBRIEF, DEBRIEF, and place your first $5 bet. The crown is yours. For the second running back we need to discuss, we don't have a team in playoff contention, unfortunately, but we do have someone with a similar scenario to what we've seen with Jaylen Warren. Over the last 5 games in Tennessee, we have seen a role expansion for Tyjae Spears, getting more work on the ground and very involved in the passing game. Over the last 5 games, Spears has 32% of the Titans' rushing attempts. He's still clearly second behind Derrick Henry in this offense, but over the first 12 games, it was only at 21%. So he's expanded his utilization by 11 percentage points over this last 5 games when we take a look at how often he's getting the ball on the ground. Of course, he's very involved in the passing game as well, 62% route participation. That's just below the elite number of 65% for running backs, but that is still really good. And if you look at him in long down and distance situations, 98% of the snaps, 100% of the 2-minute offense. So he is the primary passing down back. He has a 19% target share over this stretch with 5.2 targets per game, only a little bit behind Jaylen Warren, who we just talked about. And then if you look at his fantasy points per game, 11 over this stretch. Now, when we dig into the comp data for Tyjae Spears, it's not quite as impressive as Jaylen Warren. There's not as much upside here. And the biggest part of that is with Spears, I had to exclude running backs that had big roles inside the 5-yard line. It's almost exclusively Derrick Henry getting that work whenever they get down inside the 5. We've got 8% of those carries going to Tyjae Spears over this 5-game stretch. Whereas with Jaylen Warren, yes, Najee Harris leads the way in that category, but he remains much more involved. Still, when we look at the averages, it's 13.2 fantasy points per game with an average finish of running back 19. So a top 24 play in PPR and half PPR formats, which wasn't something that I expected. And just to give you a little bit of a better idea of the comps that were close to the profile that we have for Tyjae Spears, we had Giovanni Bernard in 2013, averaged 14.1 fantasy points per game. And then Chase Edmonds in 2021, his final year with the Cardinals, he was on the low end of the spectrum at 12.1 fantasy points per contest. Based on all of this information, I have upgraded Tyjae Spears to a high-end running back 3 moving forward. Now, you could argue that I should really have him in that low-end running back 2 conversation based on all of the data that we just talked about. I would feel more comfortable doing that if he was getting a little more work inside the 5-yard line. So I think there's some boom-bust to Tyjae Spears' nature here. Probably going to have to break off a long run, get in a shootout type of game script, but only $4,600 on DraftKings. So even if we're calling him a high-end running back 3, that is priced a bit low, and the Titans are taking on the Jaguars this weekend. The Jags need to win to get into the playoffs. Tennessee is not the type of team that I think will want to lay down and rest their starters. I think Mike Vrabel, his message to his team will be, let's try to keep the Jaguars out of the playoffs. Let's ruin their party. Our party's over, but we can still spoil it for someone else. So I really like Spears from that capacity. And with him and Warren, I did not have any receiving props available yet to me when I recorded the video here today, but I will be looking at their target props as well as their receptions and receiving yard props and focusing in on this last 5 weeks for Spears and the last 3 weeks for Warren to see if there is an edge.